Welcome back to our final episode in the Hole Design 101 series, and this is very much one of my favourites. We're going to be looking at the short par 4. This is one of my favourites because it's inherently strategic. It allows for a wide variety of options, and it should be a real birdie opportunity whilst also really requiring 3 good shots to get the job done. It's a huge amount of fun. Now, my definition of this hole is really it shouldn't be drivable. Driver at the green should not get you on, and it should be designed as such. However, I'd argue that to be a short but not drivable par 4, you want less than a full wedge in if you do hit driver. Therefore, it's usually falling into around the 400 yard, sub 400 yard range. They're great holes to balance up any course, and really a great course should have 1 or 2 of these at least. Now for me this was a difficult video to plan out because actually the short par 4 is the sum of its parts and you can't really analyse one without looking at all of the others to make them work. So what we're going to do in this video, rather than necessarily take it step by step, we're going to look at different examples of the short par 4 and break them down. How do they each work in harmony? How does the green work with the approach shot, with the tee shot? Because at sub 400 yards every little aspect of this hole has to be spot on and working in sync. So the first hole that we're going to start looking at is the 5th at Necedah Pines, and for me this is probably my favourite short par 4 that I've ever played. I love the way it all sets up and the variety of options depending on pin position. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the main thing you want to be doing is making that approach shot interesting, and in tandem with that making people make a choice off the tee. Now if you look at this fairway, without even looking at the green, we're going to look at different places you can play. We can play here, play up the middle here, we can play right, we can play short left, we can go long left and choke up into here, and you could potentially go at the green in a very strong tailwind, but it's not designed to be drivable. So we're now going to look at how you might get there and what sort of clubs you might hit and how he's made. So the first thing he would have done is thought, these are our kind of 5 landing zones basically, or where I want you to have the options, and you'll notice he's taken out the middle of the fairway. So when designing this hole, I would imagine one of the ways he wanted to think about it was, well, here are 5 options, and one of the things we'll discuss later on in the video is making those look seamless, because it's all very easy to go, well, you could go here, 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 or here. Making that work coherently and look like a sensible golf hole is far more difficult than it looks. So if we're then going to look at the tee shot, and we'll look at the different types of risk. Well, you've got water short, but it shouldn't really be coming in play. Hitting, I don't know, a 4 iron down here and running out to 230 is a pretty safe play. Even safer over this side because you've got more fairway to work with, whereas here, now particularly in the era of hitting a fast swing, this bunker's probably much more in play than in previous versions, but you could easily bunt down a hybrid all the way down here, will be fine. Equally, you could take on this corner, that's a little bit trickier, and you'll notice there's a camber which makes life interesting towards the bunkers. So, but less of a one over here. You can see it's a bit flatter there, whereas here we're going from 5 feet up down to 2, 1, 0. That camber's very steep, which means that this is a slightly riskier shot. You've also got the end of the fairway at 297, start at 257. So how are we getting there? Well, in this game that's probably partial driver, but shorter drivers might be okay. If you've got the 260 odd driver, you could well be just taking it down there every time. Or you could be hitting a fast 3-wood, and you'll notice the end of the fairway is pushing you a little bit more towards this bunker. So each of those, I'd argue, this one probably has the lowest degree of risk, and I'm therefore expecting kind of your lowest degree of reward. This one has quite a high degree of risk, but it's not. It's doable. It's just going to require you to hit a fairly skilled shot with a driver. And this one is kind of medium, but you're expecting obviously a longer approach in. You also notice distances. Well, even if we do play really safely, we're going to have a full pitching wedge in, so it might not be the worst. Whereas down to here, and you're looking at 68 yards, that's a pitch. More on that later. Now if we're looking at this side of the fairway, well, there we are looking at driver. Now covering that bunker 272, that's a pretty tight landing zone, so you're probably taking it over this one and rolling it up to here, and then you're in kind of flop shot distance. But that does bring some of these nasty bunkers into play as well. So these two we're looking at driver, but look at the angle you're hitting across the fairway. You might want to work a fade in order to hold that bit of fairway. There's a lot going on with this just in terms of how do we get to each of those? Each one of those shots is not necessarily straightforward apart from this one. Now we then talk about the approaches and how these go hand in hand. What I think really separates this hole out is the way that those options work hand in hand with the green, and particularly this little spine here and this one here. So those two things, let's just draw markers as to where they're going to influence, and I do this a lot whilst I'm designing. How are those going to influence balls coming in? Well, if you've got a pin here or here, I do not want to be coming in from this side, because I'm, particularly this one, if I'm pitching into a downslope, I'm rolling way past down this little slope and I'm two putting, and this is a hole that I really want to make a birdie on. So for these two, I'm going to be wanting to go over here where I've got an unimpeded line in, I've got some nice little fairway in. This side, I can use this as a kicker and roll it round to this slope. So the pin position has really dictated where I want to be. The green has done this really nicely as well. If I go long this way, well actually, you know what, I can almost use it as a backstop and just ping it into there and have it come back down. Same with this one, there's a tiny bit of slope at the back that might bring me back onto the green, and I'm hitting a splash shot. Whereas, what about these pins? Well, if I'm hitting to this one behind this spine, I don't really want to be coming from here, because the same thing applies. I'll be hitting this and I'll be bounding off back here or off the edge of the green there. Now if we look at the other side of the green, well, for these pins, this one, I don't want to be coming in from this side, because if I do, I've got the same thing again. I'm hitting on this down slope, I'm rolling off, possibly even funneling off the green, because you've got this swale at the back. So I definitely don't want to be on this side, but suddenly coming from here is a much more attractive option, because I can funnel down this slope. I've actually got some vertical room for error. If I land on this slope, I'm probably spinning and rolling by the hole. If I land here and funnel out a little bit, I'm going to roll down this slope gently and roll up nice and close. So look at how things like slopes can be a double-edged sword, and how they can work with different pins in different ways. Same for this one. Now for this final pin, I probably do want to be over here, but if I were coming from this side, it's not the end of the world. We have a little bit of a backstop here, and we can stop it or funnel it in. I wouldn't say it's my ideal way to come and attack this pin, but it's not as disastrous as coming at this one, say. So finally, let's look at our safer options. Well, if we'd gone from here and 130 yards out, well, apart from for this one, I'd say it's actually not a bad option. You're allowing people to take a safe play off the tee, and you're saying, well, you're not necessarily making birdie, but you're not going to make worse than par, usually, unless you're hitting a really bad wedge shot and kind of short-siding yourself. And the final thing I really liked about this hole, where I thought it had a bit more depth than people maybe realised, look at this wedge shot into here, versus if you were laying up way back here, that spine came in again, because even then, this side, even slightly hedging your bets over to the right, you can use that slope in a way that coming from the left you just can't. So, in summary with this one, look at how the approach shot and the tee shot come into mind. The more, and work in parallel, the more you bite off the tee, kind of the better your reward, but it's a strategic hole, and by strategic we mean you have to be thinking it through rather than just pulling driver and aiming. It's not heroic. You're not trying to go at the green and just hit the best shot you possibly can. You're trying to think through which is the most pragmatic, most sensible option that's going to let me kind of score out birdie. So with this hole, again, it's built on many of the same principles. You've got a variety of options. You've got a huge amount of space for a safe play, and if we were to play an iron, mid-iron up here, we'd only be left with a pitching wedge in. But you're kind of banking on the fact that people are going to want to take on more than that. You give them all this space, but it's rare, even though it might be a good play, push it all the way to the edge and you're left with just a sand wedge in. To any of these pins, that's a pretty good option and still will yield a number of birdies. But you're banking on the fact that people are going to want to bite off more than they can chew. And nobody really wants to hit, even though it might be a good option, very few people are going to hit 4-iron off a tee. So, with that in mind, what other options did we give? Well, you've got this bit of fairway here. How can we use that? Well, we could be hitting a 5-wood roughly over here and trying to stop just short of that central bunker. We could be hitting a 3-wood or a partial driver just into this channel and funneling down to here. That's an option. So again, we'll divide the fairway into those little spaces, and we're looking at how the tee shot is interesting every single time. So first one, there's no real interest, there's no real danger, but there's limited reward. You can go a little bit further right, which will open up that back pin a touch more and carry a bit of the bunker, and you've got a bit more fairway to use. With this one, again, the only danger is this bunker short, but actually you can bounce this down with relative safety. These two plays are kind of your two easiest ones. And then this one, a bit more risk, but opens up the green a touch more. Now I think the majority of people though would take a 3-wood down here, because there's a huge amount of space, and they're funneling down to around about here most likely. Your final option would be you hit driver, and you try to nestle down in this area here by funneling off this mound. So one of my ways of making this sort of hole work is, on a hole this short, you don't really want people just smashing driver short of the green with complete impunity. So that is an option, but let's look at what that driver to there brings into play. Brings in this bunker if it's not well hit or if it's into wind. Brings in this ravine short where you're definitely not making par from. Well, you're definitely not making birdie. You're hitting a very tight landing area, and it's kind of funneling off as well. Really, I think if you're downwind though, might you try bouncing here and trying to run on? I wouldn't consider this a drivable par 4, but downwind it could be. So we then start looking at the green, and as with Necedah 5, you've got a spine. You've also got a little one here as well that's dividing this pin from this pin. You've got some big slopes that we'll highlight as well. And then finally you've got this little tier at the back that you might see, kind of half tier with a little bit of a backstop behind it and a little bit of a runoff short. Now the final slope is then this one here. Now what's worth being aware of is the fact that none of those are there by accident. All of those are designed around the pins you've got. So what's our best line in for this pin? Well, we don't want to be coming over that slope, and as we can see it's slipping down this way. So we've got to be bouncing it short, which means we probably want to be landing it here and going towards it, which means it's going to favour from here or from back here. And that's where we talk about distance of approach a little bit as well. It's not just line into a pin. But if we're hitting sand wedge, we're going to stop that and spin it pretty quickly. If we're hitting a pitch shot, we're not going to be spinning that as quickly, and we're running into this runoff a little bit more. If you are coming in, however, from the other side and playing to that safe-ish area that we thought everyone would think, oh, well, that's an easy play, 3-wood down to here. You're looking at a 70-yard pitch shot over that mound, dead towards this runoff. So there was a reason all of the slopes are there. People might think it's tricked up if they go over there and they hit down that runoff. In reality, you've just chosen the wrong option. And hey, it's a short par 4. We don't get to trick holes up that much. Now, let's look at another pin. Well, this front pin, again, you've got the same sort of angle, and the same thing. So if you're on the right with this green, you want to be coming in from the left, because here you've got a little bit of a backstop. You can bounce it short on. However, this one also gave you the option to smash it down here, and if you went really short here, actually you've got a little bit of a backstop and you can get into this pin. So what about the other pins? How do they benefit a different angle? Well, this pin, you'll notice it's protected that way by that huge little false front there, which would take you off the green. For this one, I would be wanting to come in from over here. I'd probably want my full wedge, so around 90. That, I think, is a relatively safe shot. I can land it short and I've got an uphill putt. Whereas if I'm coming in from this side, I've got very limited margin for error. I did give you a backstop so that if you went slightly long, it would feed you back on. But really, the play for that pin was to come out from right, or from kind of short middle would have been absolutely fine as well. And then this final pin, well, I think you've kind of got a choice. With this one, you could play out here and you could roll down that slope towards the pin, or you could play out from this way and just go straight through that little funnel and use this to just camber you towards the pin. So again, with this one, I'd really look at how the green's done, the options you've got off the tee, and varying risk reward from those. Now, what this one exemplifies is that the question that you ask, if you look at the last two we've seen, was quite complex and depending on pin. It doesn't always need to be so. This is quite a simple but really well executed hole. So if we look at the green, you can see there's big right to left slopes, you can see where the bunkers come in. But I think with this one, the green being so offset from the fairway, by offset I mean the green's kind of on this sort of a line and the fairway's on this sort of a line, and you get the fairway cutting in this way, which means that you really exacerbate some of the angles. Now the green coming this way, we don't want to be coming in from this side where there's all of that space. We want to be inching as close to the left as we possibly can. How's that defended? Well, a few trees, bunkers, tight fairway. It's not a complicated question, it's not pin dependent. Pretty much every time you're going to want to be short in this sort of an area, and then you've got a full wedge with probably the best angle you can generate. So the next hole that we're going to look at is 14 at Mornington North. We're actually looking at on the composite routing, but we'll come back to that one. Now, with this hole, it's all about a tricky green and not wanting to hit a pitch into it. So again, thinking about the distance that you're leaving yourself. So if we're looking at where driver might land and roll to, somewhere short of the green, you're facing a pretty tricky splash shot maybe with a mound here. So depending on where the pin's put, that mound will factor into all of them. There's also this big kicker slope, so if I'm going at a pin here, I don't really want to be hitting a sort of gap, a pitching wedge splash shot into that, because I'll likely funnel down and off the back of the green. So where do we want to be? Well, really you want to be leaving yourself somewhere up here, but then you've got this slope and how that's dictating it. You've got awkward lies. This is one where you can just hammer driver down here, and you may even get on if it's downwind, but it also might be the worst place to leave yourself. Imagine if you did just make it onto the front of the green and you've got this as a putt, say. I'd rather have a full wedge shot into a pin back there and leave myself here. So now looking at the two short par 4s on South Yarra, here you've got a really wide fairway on the 10th. You can hit it pretty much anywhere, and that's a real feature of the sandbelt course I'm trying to imitate. However, if you look at the pins, well, for these two, if you can see that the pin's back and right, you're going to want to be hugging the left hand side of this fairway as much as possible in order to get a decent angle in, because that bunker cuts into the green. Whereas back right, you're going to be challenging this side as much as possible. The safe / good for everything play is actually to hit it dead centre of the fairway, which is very rare for a hole that I design. So if you're hitting it to 250 odd dead centre, you've got a pretty good look at all 4 of those pins. Now, there's also a real risk option. You can try to drive it down to here, and if you're hitting this side, you're probably funneling down to just short of the green with a pretty good look at 1, 2, 3 pins. For this back right one, you're going to want to be over here, which actually if you hit the other side of this hog's back, you might be funneling down this way. Now, leaping over to the 15th, and it's kind of similar, but kind of different at the same time. Here, you've got a short, a really narrow, long green, rather, that's flowing hard from back to front, and also funneling off this left-hand side. You also have a hazard that it's asking you to carry, and this one is a simple question. It's, can you be as left as possible off the tee, and do you want to carry this bunker or not? Because if you're funneling out right, well, the fairway camber is pushing you all this way down the hill, and you're left with a nightmare pitch up there, there towards a runoff, and there towards a runoff. With this one, I'm deliberately trying to give you a load of space out right, because we're kind of tempting people into hitting into an area that looks safe, and essentially all you're doing is you're pushing the problem further down the line. And I think for me that's a core principle of a short par 4. If you take on danger on the tee shot, you should be rewarded on the approach generally. Here you're taking on no danger, you're playing a drive down here thinking, oh, I can smash it just short of the green, and you realise you've short-sided yourself. Whereas if you're playing a prudent shot, thinking about here, well, you've got a full wedge to any one of those pins. Or if you hit driver over here and just hit the left-hand side, you're actually going to face a really simple flop or pitch shot up the whole green. So with this one, I wanted to show the difference between the two. This one's more subtle. This one is a bit more straightforward. There's one simple question, but it's often also on the golfer to work out what the problem is. It doesn't need to be a hole that's immediately obvious the first time you play it. Now, with all of that in mind, there's one final option, and that's just go absolutely crazy. Here we're looking at Saxondale's 15th, and you'll notice the land is phenomenally undulating. You've got these 3 kind of heather-covered mounds in the middle of the fairway. You've got a tiny green that's stepped back to front to back, and it's just a phenomenally quirky hole. Now, if the land gives you this sort of a hole and you can make something fun out of it, by all means do. This is a hole that is just really fun and borderline hilarious to play. You've got loads of options in terms of where you try to put the ball, and you've got to be thinking about where it's going to land and roll to. Now, for some, this very much will be considered tricked up, and like there's no safe play necessarily. I think there is. You just have to be quite creative with how you view it, and you've got to accept that golf is going to give you some bad breaks from time to time. Now this one, again, borderline drivable. If you catch it downwind, you can probably roll it on. But with certain spines, if you ended up on this tier and you want to be getting to this pin, I think that's probably a really bad miss. Whereas if you're hitting it down towards here, then this sort of flatter section, you do have a decent shot at some pins. At some, you're really taking a lot of danger on if you're hitting towards that. So I think with this one, it's really this is just wild and fun, and there's a real place for that. So in summary, the short par 4 is a hole that's really all about harmony, and that goes from tee all the way through to green. Is your tee shot setting up that approach shot? Are you providing a wide variety of options from that tee shot that then affect the approach shot that you're leaving in? And are you really thinking about how those approach shots fit the green complex? Those options have to incorporate risk-reward elements, but it shouldn't be it should be strategic. It should not be as straightforward as just hit driver and get as close to the green as possible. And really, as we've seen, making those options and your fairway hazarding, which is critical, really blend into the hole design is absolutely crucial. You cannot just be separating fairways and having split fairways and one single bunker. It works much, much better if all of those hazards work together. You're not trying to prevent birdie, you're trying to very much allow it, but there must be definite no-go areas that a player can put themselves in if they don't think through, or if they're overly cavalier with their tee shot. It's not a hole where driver dead centre should always be the play. And you really want to be thinking about the line and length of approach that you're leaving. Do you want to consider leaving a pitch in? Do you want to consider from the left side, from the right side, etc.? And that can change dependent on where the pin is, but it doesn't need to. It's a way of doing it. Now, my thanks as ever to the guys who have let me use their course files for this, to pithydoctorg, Mayday, and to Energizer. I hope that this has really helped you with your designs, and it's been a really fun series to do. There is going to be another series coming soon in which we profile this golf course, South Yarra, from the very beginning all the way to its nearly completed stage, and that's one that I'm really excited to be sharing with you. So until then, see you soon.